turns out there's a whole bunch of scientists and researchers doing the same thing I've been doing for the last 7 years, only better and with like science, as opposed to me going around to every provider I can flip and find across the planet and saying, "So, what do you do? How's it work? Is it any good?" This show is sponsored by shopveteran.ca and the Canadian Legacy Project. Are you a veteran who owns a business? If so, register your business for free on shopveteran.ca, or if you would like to support veteran-owned businesses, be sure to make shopveteran.ca your first stop shop. Thanks, everybody. But you're exactly right. Like, you have to meet people where they're at. Not everybody is willing to try talk therapy for whatever reason. They don't need to prove why. They just won't do it. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So what's door number 2 and 3 and 10? Like, you have to meet people where they are at. And there's 6,000 or 7,000 different veteran organizations in Canada with all kinds of different healing modalities that some just try something, keep your feet moving. Like, so anything is better than nothing. Hello, all you beautiful souls. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Operation Tango Romeo, the Trauma Recovery Podcast for veterans, first responders, and their families. Because the system sucks. Anybody in the system knows the system sucks. It ain't great. One of the numbers that, if you're a longtime listener, you've heard me say a bazillion times before, is that the OSI clinics, or the appointed clinics from Veterans Affairs that you are forced to go to, they have a self-proclaimed success rate of between 12 and 16%. Those two numbers come from both Canada and the US, 12 to 16%. Now, that's without knowing what metrics they're using to claim even that abysmal success rate. And what do they call success? What is success to them? So I don't know any of those details. I just know that people tend to pad their numbers. So if 12 to 16% is generous, my God, what is actually happening at these clinics? And that's why I do what I do. It didn't take me long within the system to realize, well, this sucks. There has to be a better way than this. So I started looking, and yeah, I found all kinds of things that healing modalities that work way better than just doing what the system tells you to do. So I am super duper happy to have CIMVHR, that's the acronym, joining me today. That is the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research. What a frickin' mouthful. Boys, Nick Held and Paul Hook, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Mark. And now you can see why we use that acronym, because it's not any easier saying the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research.
Yeah, like, condense it. Like the Invictus Games, Invictus. It's good. And then you do it all in the tagline, but you didn't ask me before you launched this thing. No. So here we are with CIMVHR. Boys, tell me about the history of it. Like, how long has this been around?
Sure, I can
so
kick it off.
CIMVHR was established in. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Paul.
go ahead, Nick. No, you go ahead.
I was
you first.
Say, first of all,
I think we've got a bunch of Canadians here.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you go first. No, you go first. No, really, you go first. Nick, you go first.
We'll do a coordinated effort here. So, Mark, thanks for having us on the show today, and we're really excited to be here. CIMVHR was established in 2010, so we've been around for 16 years now. And in that time, we were established because Canada was one of the few nations that didn't have an independent arm's length research institute. We started to realize, I think we've probably known this for quite some time now, but Afghanistan was another highlight of the fact that there's various complex health needs that military members, their families, and support personnel experience that's different from just a civilian population. And that really warrants some specific research to these personnel, the serving personnel, as they transition into veterans, as they age, all these components of health within their life, to really understand what their health needs are, understand the complex needs, hopefully improve the care that they're receiving. You kind of mentioned that, Mark, in your intro. That's a critical part of it, of making sure research is translated into the hands of healthcare providers, especially moving into a provincial and territorial healthcare system, which is a bit of a challenge as we know through transition. But we're also looking at veterans today that are aging a lot, and really understanding how we can support those individuals with their complex health needs and their history of service that's going to be impacting them for potentially the rest of their life. So that's how we were originally started, and that's the work that we've been doing with facilitating research to over 50 universities and colleges around Canada, over hundreds of projects, 1,700 researchers and partners in order to try to improve the health needs of those who are serving our country. Paul, I'll let you jump in if you want to kind of add any pieces to it.
Sure. I think it's a good point to tie in that the creation of CIMVHR, if everybody knows the timeline, 2010, still in the heat of Afghanistan. Alice Aiken was the founder of CIMVHR, so there's a discussion going on between her and Canadian Forces Health Services, the Royal Military College. She ended up working at Queen's as a physiotherapist. She was also in the military for a long time, so there is that big connection, and she tells a great origin story. It's about a 5 or 7 minute YouTube story that I can share, that it just tugs at your heart because it talks about the work she was doing with a client who then ended up redeploying back overseas, even though maybe might not have been mentally fit enough to do that, and the story ended up kind of solidifying in Alice Aiken's mind, the founder, that there needed to be some type of national research center that can coalesce all of the great research that's happening across the country to help veterans, to help military members and their families. And so, something like Nick said, outside of the government, but connected to it in an arm's length way. Because we know, Mark, the government and even D&D CAF, tons of great researchers, tons of passion to make people be better for operational health and readiness for their families. So we've got the great advocate in the current Surgeon General, Major General Scott Malcolm, who I did basic training with way back in the day. So 25 years of me serving in the CAF has given me an opportunity to see where CIMVHR was when I joined and where we're moving in the future, and to be able to talk to people like yourself, people in the community, to kind of be that lived experience when Nick and other people within CIMVHR are looking at the research and how that could affect military families or veterans or serving members. So it's been a really interesting story. We're kind of in our teenage years. We put out a new strategic plan a couple of years ago. I've been here. Nick and I actually got here kind of around the same time in 2023, and we're just continually moving forward. We've got about 9 projects on the go right now on research that focus on war amputation, musculoskeletal injury, children's books for resources for adults, whether it's at the Military Family Resource Center or families themselves or teachers. We have the Invictus Games research that's going on, sports rehab. So I look at it from a non-researcher side, and I'm super excited because everything that's happening um, on a daily basis at CIMVHR, at the other research institutes in Canada, are all looking at serving those who serve us. How can we make everybody better? How can we make everybody have a more fulfilling life? How can we make those serving members serve in a way that's healthier for them, and then transition to being an active member of Canadian society that identify as a veteran, but also just as a Canadian, and things that they didn't know were going to happen. I had no idea that pre-aging was a thing. I had no idea that when I was 42, I was going to, have tinnitus or tinnitus, however it's pronounced, that, I have osteoarthritis, or that, there could be things about cultural identity that I have as when I transitioned from serving in the military to becoming a veteran. And in those last 3 years, I've managed to meet thousands, literally thousands of people across the country and in other countries that come to our annual conference or that I talk with on a daily, just to find out all of the interesting things that are going on, much like you're doing, to try and make people better.
I'd like to explore the unusual symptoms that are experienced by veterans and the unusual links and causes of them, like things that people wouldn't think of, that they wouldn't see coming. One of the ones that is really the dirty little secret is incontinence from PTSD. And people don't understand, why? That doesn't make any goddamn sense. But it's a thing. And nobody likes to talk about it, of course. Like, who likes to say, yeah, I shat myself last week? Man, that was embarrassing. But it frickin' happens. And it's actually super common. They'll just wrap it under IBS. And I'll get the occasional friend reaching out to me and go, hey, Mark, ever had a problem with your guts since the tour? Well, yeah, actually. Now that you mention it, there's been plenty of embarrassing times, and like more than the average, I'm sure, like just horrible. So things like that. Or the blast injuries, CTE from firing the Carl Gustav weapon, or bigger mortars, things like that. Um, is there anything that you can add to that, like of unusual symptoms and causes that people just don't think about? Burn pits, another idea.
Yeah, I think this is a good question because there's a whole bunch of areas of service, and this is a key to CIMVHR that supports all areas of health, and across the life course of service, which is really important, right? Because these things, they might appear in the moment, they might appear years later, but the reality is there's pieces of service that really come together in many different ways to impact and impact the health of those who have served. And so I think one of the key pieces here is it's not always going to be a single event. Like we can tie brain health and brain injury, which we have some research on right now to understand the impact on the brain of snipers and look at how we can look to modify training. And of course, this is always going to be with those who are leaders in the training space to make sure, like, obviously, you have to fire a weapon so many times in a year to stay trained and qualified. So it's always a balance back and forth. Um, but I think there's a whole area to understand factors associated with some of these conditions, because you're right, they may or may not be different than what we see in the civilian space. But we see individuals who are leaving surface. Sometimes they are voluntary, they're involuntary, they're medical releases, and these things impact those differently. And how you were supported through that transition process is absolutely critical. And where you tie your identity to through transition is an important piece. So understanding all these nuances of service is really what makes these factors, these conditions so important. And I think that's the key part of, do people in do civilians have PTSD? Sure. Right. But we see it a lot more within veterans for some reason. Do civilians have chronic pain? We know that Canadians' chronic pain is a significant problem, costing the healthcare system $52 billion a year for chronic pain. But we see nearly twice the rate in Canadian veterans for some reason. And it's a whole multitude of factors. It's injury risk, it's actual injuries, it's the service related to it, but it's also that biopsychosocial phenomenon of losing your identity, trying to move to a medical system, moving into your family and reintegrating into your family, even related to family research related to education for your children or healthcare providers access if you have a child with special needs. All of these are factors that are almost amplified within Canadian service. So those are the pieces, Mark, where I think you see it come up in a lot of different ways, and it presents in different ways that are different from the Canadian population. And this is where understanding these and research into this to understand what things are individual experiences, which are still important and highly relevant, and which things are across Canadian veterans or Canadian serving members as common, and looking for treatments to help support that as well from a true number standpoint.
As far as you know, with all those researchers that you have, has anybody been looking into, and with 1,700 researchers, I mean, you're not going to know at all of what they're doing and poking around with. But has there been any research that you're aware of looking at the ACEs scores of those that join?
Paul, do you know the answer to this one offhand?
The ACIV scores? What's that, Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry. So ACEs is adverse childhood events. It's your childhood trauma scores. And where I'm
Ah,
going
okay.
with that is that uh, you want to take it from there, or should I
So I
elaborate?
we were actually just talking. So there's a course that's run out of the Royal Military College, and it's kind of the overarching health and well-being of military members, veterans, and their families, and focused a little bit on what CIMVHR does. So it's run by Stephanie Belanger, who's our associate scientific director and a professor at the military college. And we actually had a one of the keynotes for a weekly webinar was talking about adverse childhood trauma, and part of the research has shown that there are a lot of people that join the Canadian Armed Forces that have suffered childhood trauma, and which to me was shocking. Just because I joined the military, I grew up. My parents are both in the military. I to look at the percentage of people and hear those numbers, the 25 years I spent, I had no idea that if I looked left or right, potentially one of those individuals that I served with suffered childhood trauma, and the reasons why they join is maybe to get away with it, or to get away from it, or to feel like they can have some control in their lives, or to be able to protect other people. It's really interesting that that research has been done, and that those numbers that crop up, because if you're already suffering from childhood trauma, uh, does that make you more susceptible to have PTSD because you're going through incidents through your time in the military? And especially, as you know, how many stories came out of Man Love Thursdays in Afghanistan, where you've
Oh
got
God.
soldiers that are trying to do a combat mission, and then you hear stories of locals that are sexually abusing children, and what can you do, and how much of that trauma is going to trigger something that happened earlier in your life potentially, or it becomes a moral injury because you don't know what to do in that situation, where you tell the chain of command and maybe something's done, maybe something isn't. But those incidents, or even if you look at the UN missions in Africa where child soldiers were used, and there's lots of that stuff going on. So how much of an impact adverse childhood trauma has on serving members and veterans where they don't know about it?
And
So
the piece I would add on to that, Paul, if
yeah,
that's okay,
please.
Mark, is that one thing we had mentioned. We talk about facilitating research. We also have a peer-reviewed academic journal that's indexed in pretty major sources. That's an international journal that's open access, free to read. Anyone can read it. I understand it's scientific in nature, so that will definitely move towards a certain population. But there is plain language summaries in it of all the research, and there's research that's been published in there on adverse childhood experiences, and you do see that they are frequent within those who serve within the military, and there's a lot more work coming out now about even on the impacts of service on family members who are now adult children, even if they're not serving. How are they parenting? How is that impacting their health? How is that impacting how they go through life day to day as well? So there's the true survey responses that we see, things like emotional abuse being the one that's most commonly reported in some of the literature that we do publish. But then there's also those pieces too of what Paul said, which is quite interesting. And no, Paul did serve, of course, but lots of people who say, we had somebody who was joined as a student for us last year at CIMVHR, who's both of her parents were CSOR and has experience in the military, saying, I didn't know there was military research. I didn't know there was family experience. I didn't realize that my life was impacted because my parents served, even though I didn't serve. So that's another piece of it that's really important, is even being able to recognize what would be an adverse childhood experience, which some people are it's very direct, it's very obvious, it's very identifiable. And for other people, service is impacting their life and who they're going to grow up to be without maybe even kind of knowing it's happening at that time.
This is a topic that I bring up a lot. So, for my longtime listeners, sorry, we're talking about it again. It's kind of important. So, the American military does a really, really good job of keeping track of all kinds of numbers, including the ACEs scores of those that join. And what they've tracked is that the higher your ACEs score, your childhood trauma score, there's a direct correlation between just how severe your ACEs score is and what trades that you choose. It's also in first responders. So within the American military, it's when you look at infantry as a subsect, their ACEs scores are considerably higher than those that choose the Air Force. And then those that go into any of the tier 2 or tier 1 special forces, as you go up the ladder, the ACEs scores correlate. And we see this with first responders, and we certainly see it with military. I just had mine done. Out of 10, I was a 7. So I had
Wow.
PTSD before I joined the military, but that's normal. I remember in battle school, everybody kind of sharing these childhood stories and having a gallows humor laugh at them. And I thought, geez, I thought mine was bad. Ooh, I should probably quit whining. These other people have had it way worse than me, comparative trauma, as so many people do. But so I just thought this was everybody. I thought this was normal. I thought everybody had a fucked up childhood. But no, that's those that choose these trades for whatever reason. And Paul, I think you had a lot of a good speculation there. I have the same speculation that maybe you're trying to empower yourself, or you were so sick of being the victim you wanted to become the hero, or who knows what it is that that has kids that had a shitty childhood choosing a trauma-rich environment for a profession. But yes, it does make you more susceptible because the trauma cup analogy. I'm going to guess, right? So the average person, because shit happens, life is life. Their trauma cup is going to be about a third full, give or take. That's a normal ACEs score. Things happen. Your dog died. Your dad maybe raised his voice a couple of times. A third full. Just
Yep.
normal life stuff. But for those that joined, especially combat arms trades, their cup is 3/4 of the way full. Mine was literally 3/4 of the way full. So there's not a lot left. And then if you have a rough go while you're in the military, which I did, started with a sexual assault that happened to me in basic training, where 5 guys jumped me and stuck an industrial vacuum cleaner on my junk. Like, I was pretty damn angry about that. I was not a consenting guy,
Yeah.
but that is other traumatized people thinking that that's okay. Or maybe they saw one too many movies and they thought that this type of thing is funny. It wasn't fucking funny.
Yeah.
Like, it was horrible. But this is the group that you are now in. So you have a bunch of people with high ACEs scores all together doing stupid stuff because you're young and dumb anyway. And so then more things happen, and it snowballs. Like when the Airborne got disbanded, and the excuses that they used with these hazing ceremonies. Well, that's a bunch of super rowdy people into an extra rowdy environment, and it snowballed. It snowballed to a point where it was a little much. Like, probably we could have scaled that back a little. Then you end up in a war zone, and your cup was already 3/4 of the full or more. Well, there's just no room. So a little bit of war and you're done, unless you're and nobody's is not susceptible to it as well, because there's 2 types of PTSD, and I'd love for you guys to argue with me on this, or put in a third type, or say it's all the same, or whatever your inputs are. But there's what I've found is that there's 2 types. There's moral injury, which isn't fear based; it's more disgust based and identity based, because it challenges your identity. And then there's the neurological version, which is you got the throttle on full because of a super sketchy event, and sometimes it's just one event, sometimes it's 1,000. But eventually the throttle gets stuck on full, and now it's a neurological injury. You can't relax. You can't settle down. The cortisol does not stop pumping. Hypervigilance, crazy nightmares, because even when you're sleeping, the cortisol is still pumping. So your brain translates that into a wicked nightmare because you can't stop the cortisol from pumping. It's a shit way to live. I lived with nightmares for more than 25 years. It was brutal. Thank God for cannabis. That's what did it for me, and it got rid of them. Anyway, where we're at so far, uh, agree, disagree, chime in, where you at?
I'll say first of all, I'm sorry to hear that all that you've been through, Mark. Like that is challenging, and that's some of the work that we're trying to do and trying to understand and highlighting some of these pieces. Right, is that the military is a unique culture, and obviously they're learning, they're trying to improve, which is great. But it's an interesting culture to go into, and I think some people go into it because they really thrive on, or maybe they're looking for that structure. Maybe they never had it growing up, and they want that structure, so that those adverse childhood experiences are one significant element in their upbringing, and maybe they're joining for the camaraderie, the team spirit, things like that. And then when you don't experience that, especially so early on, like that's another piece that's very challenging. And then we know the lack of support while you're in and seeking services because of fear of promotion or whatever it might be impacts on your career, reasons that people don't always seek health services. So it further compounds the challenge of this environment. And luckily, there has been more research. Like the idea of moral injury and its recognition is a newer concept in research. Not saying it's brand new this year, of course, but it's newer in relation to other mental health diagnoses. And it's great to see that it's being recognized more and more because it is symptoms of its own. And part of this piece of why, like, if I think there was a I'd have to get the numbers exactly right. This was for the Canadian population, and it was in the CBC or some kind of news source saying 66% or two-thirds of Canadians have experienced traumatic events, right? Like trauma is all around us, and I'm not comparing anybody's trauma against another's, but the idea is that people experience trauma, and people can experience the same trauma and respond very differently to it for a whole host and variety of factors. And that's the interesting thing, is understanding that. And the other piece is, especially in mental health, we've been trying to do a lot more work on measurement based care. And if you look at in physical health, things like, for example, blood pressure, we know what that could lead to. And we are doing our best in physical medicine. I don't mean we as CIMVHR, but I think in Canada, to think about ways to measure things in order to prevent some of these significant diagnoses or health concerns. In mental health, that's something that we need to get better at, in my opinion, is measuring intervention opportunities, seeing what the results are, making clinical decision making off of that, instead of waiting until symptoms set in. We're still working on developing those biomarkers. Like, what can we look at to say this is a predictor or this is something that is leading to X, Y, or Z, as opposed to waiting until symptoms set in and you're feeling all these things and you're not in the best environment and we don't know how to help you. So so I agree. I don't know if I would call it two types of PTSD necessarily, but what I would say is PTSD and moral injury are different concepts that are highly related. And I would throw traumatic brain injury in there as well, right? For the longest
Oh
time, it's
yeah.
kind of grouped together. Traumatic brain injury and PTSD and brain health kind of gets grouped together at large. And it's only more recently that we're recognizing that there could be some similar symptoms, but these are presenting very differently, and treatments are going to have to be targeted and different as well, potentially. Now, there's going to be overlapping ones, of course,
if
so it's not
if
to
your
say that,
focus
but
if your focus is on on treating symptoms, then yes, which
sure,
unfortunately medical science tends to do. They look at the symptom and say, how do we deal with the symptom? But if you look at the cause, it's all brain damage. Like everything from mefloquine poisoning, moral injury, neurological PTSD, I'll call it, from having your throttle stuck on full,
sure.
concussion, CTE. It's all brain damage. And what do you know? You line up all the symptoms from the DSM 5, which I am not a big fan of, but it does have its purpose. But you line up all the symptoms, huh? Look at all the correlations. They're like 70% same symptoms. Like there's very, very little variation, which makes diagnosis a son of a bitch because people either diagnose too easy or it's just diagnosing is tough. It's just about impossible. Like you almost need AI to do it because there's just too many where it's all exactly the same, but it's all exactly the same because it's all brain damage. You can see all of it in a brain scan. It's like, oh, look at that. There's this dot over here and there's a shadow over there. Like you can see the neurological damage in the actual scan. I think it's called a PET scan is the right one. So brain damage is brain damage at the end of the day, and finding something that causes neurogenesis to repair that brain damage, which we'll get into in a moment here, that actually fixes the issue as opposed to treating the symptom.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. So I didn't mean to paint a picture necessarily of only treating symptoms, but the reality is that we
Well,
also have to
that's how
learn
the
how to.
system is, though. That's what
Sure.
the system
Yeah,
does.
I don't disagree with that. And there is these pieces of looking at how we diagnose these things, and that happens on both sides of it. And there is any type, like there is treatment right now that are going to support all three different kind of areas or brain health at large, right? Like we know that Canadian veterans, a majority of them do respond well to kind of your conservative treatment, but there's still about a 35% of individuals for whatever reason that are not responding well to traditional means of treatment, that are looking for other opportunities. And whether that's multiple diagnoses, whether that's complex health needs, whether that's varying experiences, whether that is individual differences, those things are going to happen. And I think that's where you're seeing the research heading right now, is how do we support those people who are not responding to that treatment to make sure that Canadians aren't left behind.
Well,
I
Mike, I
think
have a question on that. Sorry, Paul. Um, I've always wondered, is it the carpenter or the tools? I just think about my horrendous experience with the psychologist that I had at the OSI clinic. Um, we chose, for whatever reason, ART. I mean, she just gave me, okay, here's the 4 different modalities. Pick one. Well, how in the frick would I know which one to pick? I don't know. Door
Mhm.
number 3, I guess. And then we just stuck with it. So I did ART, not knowing any better and really not having any guidance. But the carpenter, being the psychologist, was the shits, like just terrible. Everything from rapport to the act. So I have no confidence that we were doing it right at all. And anybody that I've talked to about, okay, this is what we actually did, they're like, oh yeah, no, 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 that is not what that's for. Like that is not how you do ART. So of course it didn't work very well. As a matter of fact, it made just about everything incredibly worse,
Mhm.
um, with a couple of exceptions. So that was the carpenter. Uh, is some of the research from CIMVHR look at that? Like, okay, is it the modality? Is it ART, or um, is it the person? Is it the carpenter? Is it the practitioner? Is there? Do you try to parse that out, or can you even parse it out?
I think you can parse it out to some degree, but it's such an interrelated piece that's really important, right? So
Mm.
part of it is that many clinicians in Canada, whoever that is not going to ask if you have military service. And even if they did ask it, they might not know what that means. So part of it is understanding the impacts of service and understanding how the healthcare provider can ask questions, can inform their care based on that service. So we have some work related to cultural competency to train healthcare providers on what it means to serve and why that is important. And I think that's critical because we have, in some capacity, you talk to some veterans, there is a bit of an identity, well, not a bit, there is an identity shift there, and that impacts some more than others. Like I've worked clinically with veterans with chronic pain and mental health concerns that are, you ask them if they're a veteran, well, their grandfather served in World War II, so they don't relate themselves to being a veteran, and they definitely don't feel like a civilian, but they can't call themselves a serving member anymore. So what are you? So you can't rely on the veterans to say, oh, I've served and this has impacted my health in this way and this is what you need to know. So there's that training element there. Now, there's the other piece too of, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I would hope with ART that that clinician would have used that previously, was trained in it, and it supported some people and they thought it may work. But the reality is no treatment's going to work for everybody, unfortunately. And there needs to be recognition of and measurement, which like we've recently published a special issue on measurement-based care. There needs to be a measurement of, okay, this is, you are not seeing the results that we're expecting to see, so we need to maybe shift and try something different to see if it will work for you, right? Just this idea of like, no, it should work. I hope it works. No, it's going to work, but not actually measuring is really an unfortunate way to practice in some ways, right? Because we need to find what works for certain people. And there's research out there to show ART is an effective model. Now, this is also a pinpoint, and I'm not saying effective, Mark, in your case or in veterans or in the challenges that you were working through. But obviously, what I'm suggesting is there'd be theory, there'd be research on it being effective somewhere at some time. And to me, this really highlights the importance of research, because if we're just taking models from, and this is a bit of a balance as I say this, I know, if we're just taking models on from those who haven't served and the research treatment modality is effective for them, is it going to be effective in Canadian military veterans? Because even the structural brain damage is one thing, but there's a whole bunch of factors related to that from the biopsychosocial perspective that potentially it's not targeting in the same way, or it's not effective in the same way. So we need research on military veterans to understand the effectiveness of these treatments. And I would also argue we need more research on Canadian veterans, because the American healthcare system, we can learn from them. We don't want to say we need to reinvent the wheel on everything, but our system is very different from the way veterans feel when they release and integrate into the civilian population, how they feel supported and appreciated by the population, or how they access healthcare because of VA hospitals and things along those lines. So when we do research, or we do a systematic review of looking at the literature, and we find, yeah, this topic has 80 articles, but only 5 of them are on military veterans, and guess what? 4 of the 5, or 19 of the 20 are in the US and only one's in Canada. That context does matter.
Paul, what do you think are some of the factors that make us, by us, I mean you and I being veterans, that make us different from the general population when it comes to treatment?
Sure. So just on that, just to tie back into your question about adverse childhood trauma. So
Thank you.
while you two were talking, I did a quick search on the Journal of Military Veteran Family Health. So we do actually have a few articles, and one of them is the relationship between adverse childhood experience and moral injury in the calf, and another one was the relationship between childhood abuse and suicidal behaviors in treatment seeking sample of Canadian military police and veterans. And so that, like, kind of where CIMVHR ties in on that is getting groups of people together to improve the research and inform government, veterans, policymakers, and everything else. So, the Australian Royal Commission on Suicide Prevention happened, I think, 2 years ago. They released the results last year. The Canadian Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs is looking at suicide prevention right now. There are a lot of different people that provided witness testimony. Nick was one of them. So we talk about all of this and where it all relates, and we look at I think in Canada they're now counting suicides of veterans as potential people that died in or related to the conflict in Afghanistan as an ever increasing number, and the number of suicides that happen in the veteran community here in Canada and in the US is astronomically high. And then we tie that into what you were talking about military cultural competency and how do people even know what's going on. So if we look at the College of Family Physicians of Canada, even 9 years ago, they put out the best advice for caring for military families in the patient's medical home. And so that's, informing doctors on what it is that makes you and I different. Not only just you and I, but our families, right? Because families move, families don't have access to healthcare practitioners. So even in 2017, 2018, about a quarter of military spouses did not have a family doctor. So I moved back from overseas. I was gone for 6 years, and I came back into the Kingston area where 30% of everybody doesn't have access to a doctor. So when I retire, how am I going to lump myself into that? Now, I would think, and this is just me speaking as a veteran, not as a member of CIMVHR, not as anything else. I would think that when you retire, you should have access to Canadian Forces Health Services doctors until you find one in the civilian side. If you
Do we
happen to
have
be
those?
if you happen to be close to a base. We don't have that, but what we do have, and this is because there was discussion between Canadian Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs Canada, is for the first year after you retire, you have access to a doctor 24/7, I think, on a telephone call line. I didn't need it because I lucked in and was able to get a doctor through my wife and my kids on that. So we know that all of this is happening, right? We know there's a shortage. We know that you and I are more susceptible, and the 460,000 other veterans are more susceptible to some injuries and some illnesses and disorders than the Canadian general population. Why is that? I mean, there's a lot of research that would also tie in first responders, right? And so we have a lot of researchers that look at first responders and military that come to our annual conference, CIMVHR Forum, which is happening in October. And we know that there are groups like Wounded Warriors Canada, the Canadian Institute for Public Safety and Related Treatments, the Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families, and the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence. And I could go on and on about all these great groups that are looking at all of this research that are coming together to talk about it and share that information so that the policymakers and elected officials know more about it so they can change. Not only you're talking about the like treating the symptoms, but looking at the root cause. And if I look at a conversation I had a month ago with a researcher in Quebec who is a scholarship winner through CIMVHR, they're looking at how to detect um, issues of hearing loss in serving members so that they can actually decrease that through operational safety and changes, much like Nick said with brain health. So we had a discussion quite recently with the Canadian Army Doctrine Training Center and the Canadian Special Forces Command, and they're currently right now trying to make changes to training and safety to reduce the impacts of subconcussive and concussive exposures. You talked about the Carl G. Think about the if you're firing heavy artillery or doing breaching or explosives, all of those things. Can we decrease the number of training events so that people aren't having those symptoms because they're not having the exposures?
Well,
Yes.
there's
And
lots there's lots of solutions, right? Like for the
right.
Carl Gustaf, so let's translate it for the civilian audience. The Carl
Sure.
Gustaf, the Carl G, is an 84 millimeter rocket, 2-man crew rocket launcher. It makes a really big boom. And when that really big boom happens, it is beyond description of that concussion. Like what it does to you, if you just fire one round one time, you have brain damage, guaranteed. It's CTE. It's a blast injury that goes to your brain, worse than getting hit upside the head with a bat. Now I've fired it probably 40 times, so yay! but um, all they would have to do is have training rounds,
Right.
and maybe you'd have a couple at full blast. But if they have training rounds, or with today's technology, for the love of God, you can play a round of golf that's virtual. You can do it with, if you can do that, you can do the same thing with a Carl Gustaf. Just have a big screen and make it go poof or something, and instead of giving you guaranteed frickin' brain damage. But they don't do it. They don't look for solutions because you're not even acknowledging the problem. So
I got to disagree with you, Mark. They are because we were talking. We were at CanSec last year. We talked to Babcock, and they've got this Babcock immersive training experience. So it's a training simulator, and what it does is it kind of makes everything realistic. And you could set it up as a command post. You could set it up as a first aid center. They can put all kinds of realistic training. So you're talking the five senses: sound, smell, taste, temperature, and everything else. When I was a deputy defense attaché in Israel, we were looking at the AR, VR, so augmented reality, virtual reality simulators that you bolt onto infantry fighting vehicles, armored vehicles, artillery, and so all of that is happening, and it's picking up speed. So the research is actually going on as well. Some in Canada, also in allied countries, in the Five Eyes countries, so Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the States, of how that training simulation can actually reduce injuries because you're not having people having those exposures, right? So like you're talking about having a training round like a cement insert for the Carl G, or just doing it on the screen. So, I mean, when I was doing all of my training, we would use.
Oh, lost you, Paul. Did you just
Yeah,
hit?
you hit
I
mute
think you just
accidentally
hit
there, Paul.
mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah, you
just hit
muted
mute.
yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, so when I was doing training, we would do simulation for light machine guns and the C7, so your assault rifles. And I know that we there are simulators for tanks, for artillery. So if if the research could be up there to show what the reduction is in the symptoms, that'd be great. From my side as an
Yeah.
operator, doing operations and planning or training safety, anytime you can reduce the wear and tear on a vehicle by doing simulation, it actually allows you to go through the same scenario numerous times. Nick's job is to look at that from a health and safety side, and what does that mean for harm reduction or health and safety by doing that, right? So I think the two discussion points are actually happening quite well. The new Army commander is all about training safety and looking at what the Army needs for the future. And
But
they're
is it
and
actually happening at, like, say, battle schools? Like, so if somebody was to
yep.
join today, and once they get to the heavy weapons phase of battle school, are you saying that they have simulators now? Like, that's what they're actually doing, or is it just something that is available through special forces or something?
No, there are simulators at all of the schools in the combat training center. I don't know about the battle schools themselves. You'd have to ask people within the Army doctrine training, but I do know. So just think of the you're talking about the Carl Gustav, but think of the 50 caliber Barrett
Oh, yeah,
sniper rifle. Everybody that's
absolutely.
watched a movie about Afghanistan or Iraq knows what the 50 caliber rifle is, right? You are now only supposed to shoot no more than 30 rounds a day on that rifle. Why? Exactly like you said, if it's causing injuries, they are reducing the number of times that you can be exposed to that subconcussive force per day. And that's
Yeah.
because they're looking at the effects. Now, is the research backing it up? You'd have to ask Nick and all of the researchers that are looking at brain health.
Is
But
it
they
just the Barrett 50, or is it the 338 as well?
no, they actually we were talking with a researcher, DJ Cook from Queen's University, and he said the 338 is actually worse
What?
than the Barrett 50 cal for just because of the kick that happens for subconcussive force and exposure.
So the 338 doesn't have a buffer and return spring? Is that what's going on there?
I don't know. I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know they've done the research on it. Like there's current research right now looking at those two weapon systems specifically on brain health.
No
Matched
shit.
with
Yeah.
brain imaging. Yeah.
Yeah, matched with brain imaging. And 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was down at the Center for Addictions and Mental Health. Isabelle Boileau and her team are looking at the military and breacher syndrome. And I was part of a control group and had a PET scan and an MRI. And so this research is all going on right now. I had no idea while I was serving that there are hundreds of researchers across the country that are dedicated to it. So you talked about adverse childhood trauma. Tracy
Mm.
Afifi is out of the University of Manitoba. That is her specialty: childhood trauma, mental health, resilience, protection. Pamela Hollins is another one. Jeremiah Bueller. Those all of those individuals are looking at the topic that you spoke about earlier. When we look at brain health, we have people inside the Canadian Armed Forces, inside the Department of Research Development Canada, and inside academia that are all looking at those specific topics today and conducting clinical trials today. And CIMVHR's job and role is to make sure that we can get all of them together to impart that knowledge, the new knowledge, on academia, researchers, Canadian Forces members, and policymakers and elected officials.
So let's talk about implementation.
Sure.
One of the topics that keeps coming up and keeps coming up and keeps coming up is we need advocacy. And now there's groups out there that say that they're advocates. And I'm like, okay, so how do you advocate? Like, what's the actual mechanism? Well, we write a couple of letters to our MPs and hope for the best. Well, that's not advocacy. And there's people paying money to be a part of that group, you know? Um, so I'm actually looking at building something that actually works. Over the last 7 years, I've built a network of decision makers, um, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off. I'm still building the infrastructure for it. But once I build an official infrastructure for it, where actual change can actually be made, um, then it's going to be worth something. So for CIMVHR, for what you guys do, you have all kinds of fantastic research and information and recommendations, but where's it going? Is it falling on deaf ears? Is there a mechanism? Like what ability do you have to actually force the implementation, or at least influence the implementation?
It's a really good question, and I always answer this with suggesting, because I'm excited to hear that you're doing this, Mark, and it needs to be done. I would say that there's not a perfect model. There's also not a perfect model in any country, and one of the things is that it informs different prongs and different hubs in the wheel, and I've really envisioned CIMVHR as a hub within this. So you have to inform healthcare providers, right? So we work closely with CFHS, which is really important for those serving. We also work closely with Veterans Affairs Canada, the provincial healthcare system. We're not reaching every clinician, but part of our funding and part of the work that we do is dedicated to making sure that there's knowledge translation from this research and there's implementation. So one way to do it is actually to fund more implementation related research. That's quite important to make sure that you're taking it from a perfectly designed lab setting and making it more pragmatic and making it more making sure it works and it is possible within a clinician ecosystem, which is great. Then there's also, like, we are arm's length from the government, but we're not disengaged. We have bi-directional conversations and relationships all the time related to research that's going on, things that they need to know, and making sure we're having those conversations to make sure that research has the opportunity to get into policy. And if you look at our annual forum, at our CIMVHR Forum, which hosts it's a national conference. It's the largest one in Canada for the military space. We host anywhere from, depending on what city we're in, 700 up above 1,000 people every year. That's researchers coming together, but it's policymakers, it's clinicians, it's serving personnel, it's veterans, it's organizations. There's a couple things that we do there. Number one, we share all this research in a way that you can come and you can attend and you can sit and listen to it. We also allow all of our sponsors to attend any sessions as well. So if you have a booth there and you go to other conferences, you might be I don't want to use any names necessarily, but you might have a clinic that supports veterans. You're not actually allowed in the scientific content or programming. You were there for the trade show element. They're allowed to go in and attend any session and learn any of this as well. So there's all these different spokes of who to reach out to and all these different groups to connect with. And that's something where we try to be collaborative, but it can't be one group that's going to be able to do all of this. But we try to make sure we're working with clinicians. We're translating this research, whether it's through our journal, it's through our conferences, it's through meetings and podcasts like this, it's through, we have our own Beyond the Battlefield conversation where we share some of this research on important concepts. We have something called the Five Eyes Research Innovation Collaborative that we host with Phoenix, Australia. And what the purpose of that is to bring the leading researchers across the Five Eyes nations that are working on pressing issues of related to mental health all together to understand what's happening in their related countries, synthesize all this information, and get it into the hands of ministers, deputy ministers who can actually enact this and make policy changes. Our CIMVHR Forum last year, one of our keynotes was actually pulling together an international lens from the UK to Australia to Canada from a veteran standpoint, from a CFHS Health Services standpoint, and a Public Safety Canada standpoint to understand how they're using research and how this research can inform their decision making, and recognizing there's pressures within government outside of just research. It would be great if we could really imagine a world where research, a collection, not one study, but a collection of research says this, so I'm basing my decision on this. But there's public pressure, there's advocacy for the right or for the wrong. I don't want to say wrong, but either evidence-based or not, and whether and you have all these public pressures and all these other pieces to make your decisions on. We're never going to remove that, but we want to make sure that research is invested in and it's not a loss in the conversation, because if you're making decisions without it, that is something that I think is quite concerning. So
And
there's lots of different avenues we're working on.
And
are
one
you allowed?
thing, one
I'm sorry.
one
Go ahead, Paul.
thing, yeah, one thing we can do also, Mark, with the technology now is look at research papers and if they're used in policy documents by government. So we can show that there's been a direct impact from research that happened today, 5 years ago, or it's been an accumulation into government policy, whether that's within Veterans Affairs Canada or just Government of Canada as a whole. So CIMVHR is also part of a group called Research Canada, which is, I wouldn't say it's a lobby group, but it's a not-for-profit group that talks about health research and has a direct link into the Parliamentary Health Research Caucus. CIMVHR also is a member of the Conference of Defense Associations so that we can provide our information or the information within our network to 300,000 people that are all affiliated with the regimental associations. So the PPCLI Association, the uh, uh, our Armored Corps Association, the Royal Canadian Dragoon Association, the Naval Association. All of those groups can have access to some of the high level information that we talk about. Quite recently, we just did I moderated a session that talks about some healthcare resilience or health system resilience, where CIMVHR was a part of a tabletop exercise at a national level to look at how would Canada deal with wounded soldiers coming back from a conflict, a peer-to-peer conflict. So think of Canada, uh, in a war and a NATO type war against Russia, and we had 30 wounded or 100 wounded coming back every week into Canada. How are we going to take those wounded Canadian Forces soldiers that are at a federal system through Department of National Defense and recover back into the provincial healthcare system because we don't have any more military hospitals? So those discussions are actually happening. And by doing a tabletop exercise, the knowledge and information that was shared at the national, provincial, territorial, and federal levels all enabled us to deal with a hypothetical situation that could, happen in the future. But by doing those tabletops, we now have a potential pathway where we could know that those people are going to be dealt with appropriately, that the systems can handle that. So, CIMVHR looks at it not just at an individual level of uh, what happens when military families move from point A to point B. Are they getting the right education? There's some great work being done by Garnet Families on military families and children. But we also look at the experiences of what's happening in the United Kingdom through King's College and Anglia Ruskin University, or in Scotland where we have relationships, or as Nick said, in Australia with Phoenix, Australia, and Meincke. There are all kinds of groups that are doing similar research where we can make sure that those discussions are happening, whether it's at the clinician level, at the ministerial level, or us providing information into the standing committees in Parliament and the Senate, so that those reports that are going to act as forcing functions to the different government departments to change their policies or enact new ones are actually getting the information, and it's evidence informed decision making, because that's the biggest thing, right? You being in the military, we know when you're making decisions, if you're not basing it on at least 80% of the information you have, it's going to be a bad decision. Our job, our role as CIMVHR is to make sure that the experts that are doing research across Canada, across the world, are getting that information to the people that are making those decisions, so that they're making maybe not the right decision at the right time, but at least it's a well-informed decision based on science and hard research.
And if I can,
Well,
Mark, one thing, sorry, Mark,
okay.
the one thing I really want to highlight from this example, because we get this all the time. So thinking about the structure of research and how it can be communicated, I find really important. There's the narrative out there that research doesn't do anything, it doesn't move anything forward, or if it does, it takes way too long. We need answers now. But the reality is you're never really starting from point zero. We're working with our colleagues and we're able to make these decisions relatively quickly. Does some research take time? It does. But if you look at that tabletop exercise, that was out of a partner within Harvard University, Margaret Bordeaux, who presented as the keynote at the 2023 forum in October of 2023. A couple months later, was when we started planning, working with Margaret. We wrote an op-ed. We partnered with the University of Toronto School, Dalalana School of Public Health, and then with the Canadian Armed Forces, and we created this first tabletop exercise, which looked at Ontario planning. So if Ontario is at 106% capacity, how can it support anyone coming back from overseas in any kind of conflict, and really structuring what that would look like and those hard decisions to be made. And those then were at the NATO level within the year. So saying it takes 18 years, there's many examples of it not, right? So that was it informing NATO decision making at a pretty quick time. Then there was a UK one where CAF representatives, there's a UK roundtable that Canada was invited to a seat at the table to discuss as well. And then we looked at the provincial healthcare system. We looked across the provinces and territories, and the report on this, the write up, is publicly available on CIMVHR's website. It's really interesting to read because the way these tabletops are set up is looking at provinces are all capped in our public healthcare system. So how they don't, not that they don't want to, but it's really challenging to think about how are we going to take on more of a load. And then
Mhm.
Ontario's saying, why am I taking on all the load and Nova Scotia's not, or BC's not, or whatever it might be. And there was also that lack, like, what do you mean we might have to take cargo planes from industry to bring any kind of casualties or wounded individuals back to Canada? What do you mean there's not tons of Air Force planes that we can just constantly fly over, aircraft carrying people constantly? We don't have that potential within Canada. So these conversations were informing civilian healthcare providers and provincial healthcare providers, and then planning for a future event. And the other one to speak to that gives another example to listeners of important research being translated is our children's books. So Marg Rogers out of Australia has a whole research program of taking research and designing these books within Australia. And we brought them into Canada, and they're facing really hard challenges that whether it's a family member, it's hard to talk to about the impacts of military service, of deployment or training, or the history
Are
of
you
Canada's
familiar with
military
the
service.
books, with the children's book, Why Is Dad So Mad? I've had him on the show, the author. I just can't
Yep,
remember his name off the top of
yep,
his head.
yep, 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 absolutely. And the other thing we've done in our books too is we're working right now on trying to get those into every school across Canada. So it's not just the same Remembrance Week ceremony at school every year, but there is the opportunity to talk about this. There's resources in it for teachers. So teachers have the opportunity to have some of these conversations with children and identify in themselves when classroom sizes are growing, at least in Ontario, and supports are maybe not what they used to be, that military children, they might be quiet for different reasons. They might be off in the corner. They might be presenting in various different ways, and those conversations are really important. So just these examples of how do you translate research, a lot of the times it's the design of the research and trying to amplify that message, and knowing that it's not always just me sitting in my lab doing some crazy work on a bench that I'm never going to share with anybody, because that image is there and it's not always
Well,
the
there's a
case.
difference between sharing it and making it available. And well, if somebody wants
Yep.
to, the information's here. You can go look at it.
Yep.
But that doesn't really help the gap. So I'm going to give you two examples, like two personal examples, and I know it's gotten better. Like I know the conversation's gotten better. The level of general education of both with practitioners and just within like among first responders and veterans, people are starting to understand more and more and more some of the important basics. Because if you don't understand those important basics, well, that's what gets rid of stigma. So if you don't understand, then you're still stuck with the stigma and the shame. God, there's so many examples. Uh, I just want to give two. Back when my first marriage was falling apart. So let's see, 18, about 12 years ago, 14 years ago. And we tried fricking everything, man, to try to keep that first marriage together. We went through freaking counselors and psychiatrists and we did group therapy, we did individual therapy. Like we tried. Not one person, not one of those practitioners even explored my military background. They
Yep.
knew about it. They knew that I had a tour. They knew I'd been in a war. It wasn't even mentioned. PTSD wasn't even mentioned. Well, holy shit. Like, and it's not like it was just one provider. Like, we went to several and we tried and tried and tried and tried. Had it come up, because I didn't know that I had a post traumatic stress injury. I didn't know, or anything about it. Had just one of them said this, like, well, dude, these are the classic symptoms. Like, obviously, obviously you have this neurological injury. But that never happened. So there was that gap then. Now it's gotten better,
Mm-hmm.
but I just fired my family doctor, who I got a new one who I really like. So yay me. But the one that I just fired, and well, what about your back? Oh, I'm going to do his accent. But would you like a pill? It's our inside joke in our house now. Could I interest you in a pill? So I fired him. But when I asked him, when he asked me about background, I said, "Well, yeah, pretty big underlying thing. I got introduced. I got diagnosed with PTSD in 2017, and been on the healing road ever since. So kind of a big deal." And I just had to ask, like, you were aware that that's a neurological injury, right? He looked at me like I had three freaking heads. He's like, "No, I have not heard that." And I had no idea. Like, he was just so baffled and confused. So,
Hmm.
and he's not alone. Like, there's all kinds of practitioners, including psychologists and psychiatrists, that do not yet know the basics.
Yep.
That it's a psychological injury. So part two of that is there's a lot of people moving towards calling it PTSI,
Yep.
post-traumatic stress injury. It's more
Mm-hmm.
accurate and less stigma attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the answers I'm looking for are: what are we doing to bridge those education gaps with practitioners? And is changing PTSD to PTSI also something that CIMVHR believes in and is pushing?
So I will answer part of that question, and I'm going to leave the PTSD, PTSI to Nick. So Wounded Warriors Canada, about 12 years ago, made an awesome decision to start a 10-year scholarship through CIMVHR. Part of what came out of that, and part of what you're talking about with marriages and PTSD, PTSI, is the couples overcoming PTSD every day. So it's a program called COPE, run by Wounded Warriors Canada, and it's, in their words, Canada's leading couples-based trauma program for those affected by PTSI. And so Phil and Scott, the two founders of Wounded Warriors Canada, are awesome. One of our CIMVHR fellows, Tim Black, works with Wounded Warriors Canada, and some of the scholarship recipients, I believe, ended up creating this program, and they do a lot of different courses that look at mental health and couples and resiliency and training, PTSD and PTSI. So that's where I can say that there's been a determined need and the gap filled. And does everybody know about it? No. But is the information getting out there to more and more people? Yes. Not only through what CIMVHR does, but Wounded Warriors Canada is doing regional conferences every year that's looking directly at the clinician level for first responders and talking about this type of programs for people with PTSD and PTSI. So it's getting out there. And I agree, Mark, not everybody knows. I look at it from, where did I get into CIMVHR in 2023 and looking forward, and how do we get the word out every day forward? So doing podcasts with you, going out and talking, proselytizing the great research that's being done, trying to understand what type of military cultural competency we can give to different groups, whether it's the College of Physicians, whether it's the psychiatric groups in each of the provinces, making sure that we get the information to all of the different provincial and territorial ministries of health. And that's why we do our annual forum in different places. So we were in Winnipeg 2 years ago. Last year was Ottawa. This year is going to be Halifax. Next year will be in Quebec. So we try and make sure that we get that around. And by having a national network and fellows in each of the different provinces, we can get that word out as much as we can.
The cultural competency I'm interested in. I just keep thinking about my own experience with the OSI clinic and a therapist using terms like toxic masculinity when I'm just and whatnot. Just like, what are you talking about? you know, and you just have to let the military go. Like, you're not in it anymore. Just let go. Why does that have to be such a big part of your identity? Okay, you're working at a
Hmm.
fucking OSI clinic? Like that's not how it works. I've been out for 31 years. 31 years I've been out. And anybody that's been in realizes like it's always in you. It's the old saying. It's as old as dirt. The saying you can take a person out of the army, but not the army out of the person. Like you
Hmm.
just can't. It's part of who
Yep.
you are. It's formed you. And so even a clinician at an OSI clinic to utter those words is just mind-boggling. Like what are you doing? So somehow, and now this is a few years ago because I started therapy in 2019. I lasted about 4 years before I had to pop out of there. Like, oh, I just can't do it anymore. And, but at an OSI clinic is the last place you would think you would hear that ignorance.
Yeah, and I this is a challenge that we're working on. Like I agree with the point you made, Mark, that it's getting better. I would say
It
it's
is.
far from being perfect, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work to do in that area. And I have my own specific examples, and one I use when I'm sharing with clinicians, because these things happen honest enough, but they have a lasting impact on an individual. And typically what we know that is that most people in the world that are seeking therapy of either mental health or physical health, they tend to get better. And it's about a lot of it's about the relationship you form and that understanding. And we know that veterans say within 90 seconds they can determine if this person has any understanding of the military or not. And I'm
If that,
thinking of,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Sure, of course. And so I'm thinking of one instance where this individual was a young physical therapist, was seeing one of our military veteran clients. And in that conversation, this individual came in, they shared all of their symptoms and what they were experiencing. And this is a clinic that's used to working with military veterans, but this is a younger clinician. And then this individual mentioned that their service was in the reserves, and then the clinician said, oh, so you weren't really in the military, which is
Oh, I
such a
saw that coming.
horrible thing to say, which is not
Oh,
the case whatsoever. But part of it is that people are moving into these roles without being trained in the education system with these things being contexts that really matter, right? And I luckily I won't go into that whole situation and the outcome of it, but the reality being is that these things, that you can say things unintentionally that can have a lasting impact and can really hurt somebody's opportunities in future therapy. Even if you switch therapists, that's still in your mind, right? So we collectively need to do a better job of training clinicians from the very start. Like this should be more and more researchers means that they're teaching future clinicians, they're talking about military research. So it's not only those who are part of colleges and regulatory bodies, but it's also those who are in healthcare settings that might be those of the next however 5-10 years that are going to be the people that our veterans are seeing. So one thing we also do have is and this goes into research too, we have our student and postdoctoral engagement community, and this is designed to provide supports to young researchers who are in graduate school. They might go on to be clinicians, they might stay in research, but they're doing their masters or PhDs or even undergraduate work right now, to create a community where you learn the military context, either to apply to your research or just generally. And one of the things that's really important to that is that not every military research student has a supervisor that's primarily doing research on the military, for example. So they might be doing it on, let's say, something like, I don't know, think of anything. They do research on pregnancy, but now we're actually looking at research on returning to service after a time off, a period of maternity leave or something. That context of the environment that you're returning to is really important, in some of that language, that understanding the duties that's expected, the what that means for your family, who is at home in the dual service, or access to childcare, access to healthcare appointments. All of that's very different. And so if you don't have someone to guide you and work through that, then that's a big challenge. So we've created a community that allows researchers to be able to chat to some of these things, and it allows you further support from CIMVHR and those involved in the network to really help shape some of this work. And it is a lot of the time people who go on to be clinicians. And so it can start from the grassroots. And I'd argue that's really important to do it as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, so as much as those are also happening, if you look at the Veteran Transition Network, they have a military cultural competency course that anybody can take. It's free. I was talking to Oliver Thorne from VTN, and then I ended up logging into the course. I'm a veteran, so I don't need to do cultural competency, but I started doing the course, and it's just a series of videos that you can go through. Anybody can go through. You just have to log on and do it, and it gives you more awareness about the sector, about military
I'd
veterans and
like to
family.
take it.
Yeah, so it's great.
Because we talk about cultural competency all the time, but
Yep,
damned if I would know how to teach it.
yep. And
To really parse it out and say, well, this is what that is. This is
yep.
what makes us different.
And then the other example I'll give you is the Military Veteran Wellness Program. So this is run by Aaron Dale, and he's a Toronto Police. He's a former Special Forces guy, and he is hitting every height imaginable in the police services across Canada and internationally with his program, which is all about trying to understand interactions between police and veterans. So it gives you that cultural competency, so that police officers are at least aware of or cognizant of some of the issues that they may encounter if they're dealing with a veteran in the course of their police duties. So things like that are happening all across the board. How do we get it to everybody? It's a work in progress. And I mean, there's positive steps being taken every day, and those are just three separate examples that I can tell you right now. The College of Family Physicians is working on it. We work on it, as much as we can. We, as Nick was talking about our student community, we actually have a get to know your research population. So we will invite military members or first responders or family members to come in and do almost an ask me anything session with the researchers. So if a researcher is doing a bit of research just to figure out what kind of question or research they want to do, having the opportunity to ask somebody any question gives them that understanding that they may not have had before, the aha moment that's going to maybe solidify what their research methodology is going to be, or even their research question, or who in the population they're going to go and ask, which makes the research just that much better. So those are the things that we're looking at. They're small, there's small droplets that we're hoping will be the ripple effect that will cause everybody in the community, in the entire Canadian community, all 41 million of us, to understand what it's like to be in the military, to be a veteran, to be a military family, so that there's that shared understanding and that people can be sympathetic and empathetic when looking at health and well-being of that population to make everybody better.
There is still very much a misunderstanding or a strongly held wrong belief from a lot of people that uh, if you got PTSD, you're fucked. You just stuck with it. The best you can do is manage it. Just got to learn to live with it. Got to just grin and bear it. Grit your teeth and push through. Now, I know that's not true. I know that healing happens. 100% healing, I've never seen it. But get the foot off the gas. I've seen that. I've experienced that. And I've seen it with lots of other people where if you just take 20, 30% off the top, you're good. Just take your foot off the gas, please. It's a bit much. So, with that in mind, what are the top three? And for Meincke, and you guys can disagree all you want. I hope that you do. Um, what are the top three most promising healing modalities that you're aware of that CIMVHR has dug up so far?
Ooh, Nick, you go ahead first.
Yeah, I think that there's some promising ones, and my concern here, Mark, is not bearing the lead of what might be one of our keynotes of this year's CIMVHR Forum, and that's looking at some important research that's happening in the sector, looking at photobiomodulation and understanding its impact on
There's
those
a big
who.
word. What the
Yeah,
fuck is
exactly. PBM.
photobiomodulation?
Yeah. So it's light therapy, and I'm not an expert in this by any means, but you're seeing some great work
Okay.
from the U.S. And so we're hoping that this would be a keynote of ours this year at CIMVHR Forum. So I want to give a teaser to it without getting too far into it, but it's showing some pretty promising results in those with reoccurring head trauma and brain health, even from athletes, and now moving into the veteran space as well. So we don't know yet. Like, that's the point of the research, is that it's something that's promising and it's moving forward quite quickly and showing some good excitement around it. So that's number one, that's top of mind for me
What
at
does
the
it
moment.
look like? Like, how do you describe this photobiomodulation? My new big word for the day.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I'm not a clinician that uses photobiomodulation, so I'm probably not the perfect person to ask for this.
Is it like
But it,
entrainment therapy with the flashy goggles and the tonal like binaural beats, or what is it?
So it's more of a it's a cap or a helmet or something that's going over the head that you can wear. There's different devices and how they're set up. For those who are interested, there is we're not sponsored by them. We're not working with them, so I don't. It's not like we're giving this shout out for any reason. But it is a Canadian company. There's a company called V-Light out of Toronto area, and there's some great work that's happening with their products. There's also great products, so I don't mean to mention just one, but if you're looking for a visual around it, and visuals aren't always the easiest on the podcasts, but that's something where I would go kind of just check out their site in order to see kind of the visuals around it. And it's more to do with kind of my understanding would be it's more to do with kind of resetting those neural pathways of the brain and how they're kind of functioning and working together.
Okay. Can you name an expert in like, from V-Light or somebody I can have on the show to talk about this?
Yes. My honest question is when are you going to have them on? Because that's like the person I would recommend. I'm hoping is our keynote, which is going to be a pretty significant piece for us having this individual come forward. So,
Well,
um,
you can introduce me later on if
yeah,
that's all right. But that's
happy
I
to.
mean that's what I do, right? I find the
Yeah.
different modalities. I've never heard of it, and if I've never heard of it, then most people haven't heard of it.
Yeah, and there's lots of work related to different aspects of brain stimulation and things, and that's kind of the same body that these come from. So happy to make an introduction, Mark. It's not that we're holding on to information. This is information that we want to share broadly. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, being such a focal point of our conference, this is something where it's important that the individuals that we're working with that are leading in this space, because
Yep.
we're one thing about our keynotes is we're bringing them from all over the world because they are the leading people. So would love to make the introduction and
Well, I
amplify
can
that
just look
further.
up V-Light on LinkedIn. I'll find out myself.
Well, and
Mystery
anyone from
man.
V-Lite, yeah, and again, it's not the person from V-Lite that's coming. So the you could reach out to V-Lite, of course. And I'm trying to. I don't know the inventor of this specifically. I know his name, but I'd want to look it up before I give
And
the
no, that's
wrong
okay. I'll
name.
dig it up.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
number two, Nick?
Well, I kind of led with number one, which is top of mind for me right now.
That's good.
What is number two that's showing the most effectiveness within the space? I mean, we've talked. I don't want to keep going back to cultural competency, but this idea of like trauma informed care and understanding service is very important because I imagine there's different therapies that we've described can work for different people. And in my opinion, a lot of this is to do with that relationship and that level of trust that is built and that willingness to kind of see how these things tie together. So we talk about the ability to ask the identifying question, but the foundation, I think, of all of these therapies is really understanding these experiences and why they would have an impact. So you could almost put it across uniformly across any therapy that's currently going on and understanding the importance of recognizing how service is impacting that and then measuring and understanding whether that is effective or not. And why I bring that up is because you look at Chromis as an example. When they tried to roll out this measurement-based care across the Canadian Armed Forces and even Veterans Affairs, I believe, is using it as well. Looking the implementation of actually measuring the responses and to these various interventions and then making clinical decision making off of it was not picked up. So the idea is fantastic, but the reality is the idea can only be so good if this is implemented. So I think it's really important because when we're asking about advanced therapies, right, it's hard to know whether this person is deemed treatment resistant if we are not objectively measuring these and understanding them. And if we're not changing course to try something different early enough, then you lose somebody who could have quite effective impact on their health through treatment.
You
So
mean treating me for 4 years with ART only? That's not the way to do it.
That might be one example, Mark, that I could be referring to. Yeah. So something along the lines of, and there's various reasons why clinicians did not want to implement this kind of measurement piece, and some see it as a performance metric, when really I don't think that's what it's intended to be. So I'll get the numbers wrong to be exact, but I think only about 50% of clinics that were given this technology, this monitoring service, actually used it. And within that, even within that top ranking ones, there was only like 40% of clinicians that were using it. And so the reality to me there is that if we don't have a point in time, what ends up happening, so number one, you have to monitor, you have to make sure you're collecting the data, but number two, you have to learn how to sit down with that individual and explain what those numbers and what that graph is showing and how you're going to change the treatment off of it. And it does two things. It either says, Mark, this ART is working fantastic for you, even though you're not necessarily seeing the results right now, we can see what we're expecting in this treatment. Or, Mark, this is not working for you. We see this now in the data, so in the clinical data. So let's try something new. And I have this other idea because I compare that with your kind of clinical, your military experience as well, and everything I know about you and all the context to who you are. So it's really hard to say, and it creates the space of feeling like I've tried everything and nothing is working, when realistically we don't really know what you
I
tried and
hate it
what
when I
worked and
hear
what
that.
didn't.
I've
Yeah.
tried everything. Is like, dude, you don't even know what everything is. Like, if I don't know what everything is, you don't know what everything is. Like, there's just zero chance you've tried everything. Nick, what is the second most uh, promising therapy that you have been coming across?
Yeah, so maybe not a modality here, but how therapy is set up, which is critically important,
Okay.
is there is some work looking into stacked therapy or intensive therapy, and this seems to work fairly well for individuals. So the common, I don't know, Mark, about your treatment of being in therapy, but this common like one time a week or something along those lines for a prolonged period of time might work well for some individuals. And again, a lot of these treatments are targeted for those where conventional therapy isn't working well or there's something more that's needed. So there has been some research that has looked at more stacked therapy, so an intensive 1 or 2 week period where you're doing longer periods of therapy and you're doing it every day and stacking it together. And that has shown some pretty promising results as well. And it also works for people fairly well. And it could work for people in service as well, for example. So everybody takes a week vacation. That's not necessarily uncommon. I'm not suggesting this is how you want to take your vacation, but it's easy for people to dedicate a time to versus prolonged therapy. You end up not attending, adherence rates is low, you might drop out, it's not working, whatever it might be. This gives you that structured time to dedicate your time to and your focus to. So I would recommend any listeners looking into some of the research on stacked therapy and this intensive period of therapy that tends to increase adherence to the therapy that they're receiving and see these impacts relatively quickly. And then the other piece I really want to highlight quickly is just this idea that we do know that people respond fairly well to therapy, even military veterans, even active serving personnel. We tend to focus, and I agree, because no one should be left behind, and we want to support everyone to live the best life they can, especially those who have served our country. But also recognizing that these positions in society are critically important. We need military members. We need public safety personnel, firefighters, police officers, paramedics. And my one of my kind of philosophical concerns is that with all of our focus and saying these pieces are going to cause this trauma, focusing on that percentage who we want to support. So don't get me wrong in saying it's not that we shouldn't be supporting them, but this idea that we need to make sure and we need to invest time into understanding that population, because having people serve and not having anything on the other end is a good way to not have these positions filled, which is critically important to our defense, our security, our supports. So there has to be large scale investment into helping that still relatively small but very important part of the population, to say not only does service lead to these potential health impacts, but here's a solution or an answer for you or something that's going to help you on the other side.
We hear all the time these conversations about recruiting and all this focus on recruiting for both first responders and military. Oh, we have a real recruiting problem to attract people to come in. Yeah, okay. What about retention? if you pay attention to mental health and actually look after your people, you're going to keep them longer. And I'm sure we hope we're doing better than when I was in. I was in 4.5 years. And when I popped smoke and got the hell out of there, not one person put their hand on my shoulder and says, "Hey, before you go, let's do an exit interview." So why you're leaving? Oh, well, geez, if I had known that, well, we'll make a plan for you. And if we did this, could we keep you? Like they didn't even try.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, bye. Soon as you put your hand up, you're just gone, and you're persona non grata. You're gone.
Mark, you're setting these up for us because we just talked to some researchers last week from Department of National Defense. So the Your Say Matters is a survey that's done annually through Department of National Defense, and they actually sponsored a special issue of our journal that highlighted the results of their research. And one of them was actually on people that are leaving and how, so understanding the people that want to leave, and then there are people that could be convinced to stay based on certain things. So there are exit interviews that now happen in the Canadian Armed Forces. The COs, commanding officers, will do an exit interview. And then also when you're doing your medical, if you want to talk to a mental health professional about some of the reasons, so that information is being shared, and they are looking at ways of more retention. So I think that message has been hammered home a lot. The people in chief of military personnel are doing some great work on trying to understand the overall strategic imperatives to keeping people in the military and looking at the individual answers from soldiers, sailors, airmen and women that are looking at getting out, or aviators, I guess is the term now. So why they're getting out and potentially how they can be retained, or what would have changed if we had have changed something. Why would they have stayed? So those are actually happening right now. So I think that's fantastic. And if you want my answers on the top two or three, as a non-researcher, I can give you I'll give you three answers. So personally, what I do that I find and that I've talked to a lot of people works really well is getting out in nature. So I hunt and I fish, and I spend 2 to 3 weeks every year watching the world come alive at 5 o'clock in the morning, listening to everything in the forest start waking up. I see the sunrise, see the sunset. I watch animals move through the forest. I get grounded with nature. I sit on the ground for hours, hoping to see a deer or turkey. And I find for me that works really well. And there are people that I know that are hardened combat veterans. I can think of one guy named Master Warrant Officer John Green. Soldier. He's living up in Petawawa, and he set up a retreat called this Seven Wolf Retreat, I believe. And it's just a very informal space for anybody that wants to come out and reconnect with nature. So you're talking people that have been in numerous combat scenarios, that have been on numerous deployments, that have given sweat, blood, and tears, parts of their bodies for the military, and they are reconnecting with nature. And, like I said, I'm not a health professional, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a clinician, but I do think that getting back into nature and just unplugging from technology can do nothing but help. The other two that I'll bring up are two of the fantastic scholarship opportunities that are going on right now. So one I think would be awesome for you to have on your show is Captain Retired Sue Ellen McGowan. So she's doing neurofeedback. So I think her research is titled Brain Region Connectivity Following Neurofeedback in Participants with PTSD. So she's based out of the University of Ottawa. She served in the military for about a dozen years, and looking at neurofeedback and PTSD, I think,
What's
especially
her
given
last?
what you
So Captain Sue Ellen who?
McGowan, MacGowan. So she's doing her research partly through the University of Ottawa with a guy named Andrew Nicholson, who's also with Atlas Institute for Veterans and Families. So looking at the mental health side. She's also our co-chair of our student postdoctoral exchange committee, doing some great research. And I think, just what she's talking about and what they're looking at is very interesting from my side. And then the second one that I thought was really cool is another scholar, and this is through the Edgewood Health Network Guardian Scholarship, which just started last year. So the first recipient is Martine Southall. And her research is, are we missing the trees for the forest, quantifying cannabinoids, and investigating their relationship to mental health and well-being? And I would say, and I'm not saying this as a CIMVHR individual, I'm just saying as a taxpayer and as a veteran, is it really good that we're spending $250 million on 25,000 kilograms of cannabis and marijuana for veterans to get better, whether it's chronic pain or PTSD? That's a question. Does the research back it up? I don't know, because there is not a lot of research going on in this space in Canada, specifically related to veterans. So maybe that's an area that it's interesting for me, especially given the work that she's done in previous research and previous um, graduate programs. So those are the three for me.
Okay.
The last one, Mark, before I hear yours, that I think is important. We've talked about this for a little bit, but it's too up and coming right now. CIMVHR's not doing any work in this space, but I do think it's fascinating. I think kind of large data and language models and AI could play a significant role in healthcare and mental health care especially. There's fascinating stuff that came out. I mean, it's been a work in progress for a very long time, but this idea of like a digital twin, it's been used in chronic pain. It's been used in cardiovascular disease and things like that. And basically, it's the ability to use. I mean, I don't. Again, not an expert in this area, but you're able to create this like virtual model of an individual's brain and then use that for some treatment decision making. So looking at what impact, what various medications or treatments and how that could impact the brain on this digital kind of version. We see this in other sports, for example. Like if you look in football, AWS, Amazon Web Services, they're doing work of creating this like digital athlete and understanding prediction models for injuries and tracking and things like that. So this idea of bringing it down to the organ level and making clinical decision making on health, it's an area that's a bit far forward to the point for me to really like say CIMVHR's invested in it. But I do think when we look at this change in terms of personalized medicine and understanding this like individual impact structures and all of that, this idea of a digital twin is something that I'm very fascinated in. I just
That's
need to
cool.
learn more about it. Yeah.
So I'll give you mine. I was asked, I had Devin Laird on the show. He was a Patricia and then a Royal and then 16 years with JTF2. And he's also a world champion arm wrestler, the most famous arm wrestler in the world. I chased him for 5 freaking years before I got him on the show, but I got him, gosh darn it. And it was a great thing. And he's tried everything he was a breacher. So breacher syndrome, etc. But he asked me, so Mark, what works? I'm like, why does nobody ever ask me that? I'm kind of the guy. So first you have to break it into coping versus healing. Okay. That's one of my earliest episodes. What's the difference between coping and healing? Because coping ain't healing. Because if you cope, like on cannabis, is cannabis healing? Well, I'd say it's probably more coping, but good coping. It beats the shit out of SSRIs that actually have no science beyond the placebo effect. Like nothing has been shown that long term for SSRIs. If you don't believe me, try to find the research. You won't find it. It doesn't exist. So they can't help you, not long term, but they can hurt you and they can kill you. So great. How about we do something that can't kill you? How about cannabis? Where the only thing that you got to worry about is the potential for a psychosis, or even global transient amnesia. I just learned is an occasional symptom of it. So that's not good, but risk reward, right? So first parse out coping versus healing and realize that they're not the same thing, that you don't want to cope forever. You want to heal so that you don't have to cope. So for the coping, the best coping out there is dual sympathetic stellate ganglion block. Now, the thing that's frustrating about this is that it's available now. What isn't available is an understanding. Anybody can go to their doctor or any hospital in Canada, ask for stellate ganglion block, and they can they can figure it out and do single sympathetic, which is the vagus nerve on one side of your neck. Now, what this does is it completely resets your nervous system. One of the core things of PTSD is that you're on hyper alert. You're just racked right up. You're on 10 out of 10 all the time, hypervigilance. But when you just have had it for so many years that that's just your standing operating mode, you just think that's normal. That's your new normal, but it's not normal. That's why you're still having all kinds of issues with temper, with mood swings, with a raft of autoimmune issues because that cortisol hasn't stopped pumping. So, single sympathetic is just getting one side of the vagus nerve done, which is about 74% effective, which is freaking fantastic, right? Like that is blows away just about everything else. But there's a guy in Chicago called Dr. Eugene Lipov, and he does dual sympathetic with ketamine assisted therapy. He pushes it all together. So on day one, he does one side of the vagus nerve, and big relax. Your whole body relaxes. You just feel like $1,000,000. Day two, you can't do it on the same day, or you might stop breathing. Not good. Breathing's important, they tell me. So do the vagus nerve on one side on day one. On day two, do the vagus nerve on the other side, and is damn near 100% for a period of time. Now, he has some claims that I would like to, have somebody like CIMVHR actually check out. It's like, that sounds a little bit like a silver bullet, which I don't believe in. But the efficacy is off the charts better than anything else out there. Then you couple it once the nervous system is totally chilled out. Okay, now therapy might actually work. So way more effective. And a ketamine assisted therapy which pushes the ego aside, so you can actually, the ego is like this guard dog of the problems, and it takes years of trust with a therapist before you can get past that guard dog and actually look at something that's real and get down to the nuts and bolts of it. So get the frickin' guard dog out of there with the ketamine is just one of the psychedelics that works. And then you can actually get to the root issues, and bada bing, bada boom, you're fixed. Worst case scenario on this is that you're good for like 3 or 4 months. But that's better than anything frickin' else out there. Most of them you're good for at least a year. Some people, they claim permanent. Like there's been 5-year follow-ups and it's still good. Just with single or dual sympathetic stellate ganglion block. So that's step one. It's accessible. There's no legal hurdles to jump through. Just need a bit of education and do dual sympathetic instead of single sympathetic. So stellate ganglion block. Let's start there. That should be accessible to everybody. Most people have never even frickin' heard of it, even though it's available right now in Canada. So that one drives me bonkers because that's an easy.
So Mark,
Go ahead, Paul.
on that, I'm a veteran as part of a clinical trial. Well, I'm the one of 2 veterans that are part of the group doing a clinical trial at the Kingston Health Science Center. And so there's an article that came out on April 25th last year, and the title is Kingston Health Science Center piloting joint treatment for chronic pain and PTSD. So this is using the stellate ganglion block to look at chronic pain and PTSD as a So this is something funded by the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence, and I'm just an advisor on the group looking at it from a veteran side for the scientists and clinicians that are in the research project itself. So it is being done with veterans and looking at it for how to treat the comorbidities like Nick was saying for chronic pain and PTSD. So there's a lot going on in the field.
We had some research presented on that in 2022 at our forum. Yeah.
It's got to be more accessible, and both the clinicians that know how to do it correctly. Now, Paul, for what you're participating in, I'm going to guess it's just single sympathetic. It's just on one side.
I believe so, but again, I've looked at it from the veteran angle, just like providing some advice on what the document should look like for when they're sending it out. But I can get you in touch with the principals. So there's Dr. Scott Duggan and Etienne Bisson, who are who are leading this, and they can answer all your questions on that.
I suggest sharing with them the episode I did with Dr. Eugene Lipov,
Sure.
talking about the package that he puts together, because I think he's got it
Sure.
right. It's the one of the most promising things that I've seen. So now, if I had a magic wand and could create a therapy for veterans and first responders, it would start with exactly what Dr. Eugene Lipov does: dual sympathetic, stellate ganglion block, ketamine assisted therapy. Because knock the head off the snake right off the bat. Might grow back, but probably will grow back. But it's just the most aggressive way to knock the head off the snake and just give instant relief. Like not 5 years up the road, 5 days. Like it's just there you go. But there has to be follow up. I don't think it's a one off like he seems to claim. But the other thing that I would do, again, magic wand scenario, you start with the Dr. Eugene Lipov treatment, and then within 3 months, no more, within 3 months of that treatment, ibogaine assisted therapy, which is just opened up in the States. It is all psychedelics are not created equal. They are not. They have different, they all seem to provide neurogenesis, so actually repairing brain injury, which is great. Ibogaine is just something special, though. That seems to be a one and done for the vast majority. Occasionally, somebody will go for a second treatment, like it's an ass kicker of a treatment. It ain't a party. But the efficacy rates are out of this world. And for addiction, I mean, you could pretty much get rid of addiction, homelessness, you name it. Like the potential impacts are absolutely massive. It's now legal in, oh God, so many states. It's really taken. Brian Hubbard is the biggest voice of it. Trump just greenlit it across the states, thank God. But Texas is where it really started. Also, Virginia, Kentucky. It's growing and growing and growing and growing. But now, since that executive order was written, I don't know how much of a dent that's going to make, but it's going to help, not hurt. So
That was $50 million that Trump said towards research, right?
He just made it so that it's not a Schedule One
Yeah.
Schedule One drug anymore. So it's like, yeah, okay, it's not this illegal thing anymore. You're not going to go to jail for trying to use ibogaine. It's not like it could ever be a street drug, but like it can't turn into the next fentanyl. That's physically impossible. It's not a good time, but it's also not 100% safe. So it has to be done correctly, and you have to do a pre-screening. Otherwise, well, you could die, just like any other drug, right? So you got to be careful with it. But had I a magic wand, that's what it would be. It'd be ketamine-assisted stellate ganglion block, followed by, within 3 months, ibogaine-assisted therapy. And the efficacy, if you put all that together, because you have to relax the nervous system first, right? And get used to having a new relaxed nervous system. But if you put that together, and then at the end of that, you can't just do a one and done, then it's connection. That's where things like nature and whatnot help, right? But my challenge, Paul, with just take a walk in the woods. Yeah, that used to be my thing too, until it wasn't, until it did fuck all for me. That was the scariest part of my whole journey. When going into the mountains in Kananaskis, the most amazing, beautiful, and the physical labor and climbing up a mountain and going into the back country, it did nothing.
Yeah.
And when it did nothing, I knew I was in trouble. I don't feel a damn thing. The numbness was terrifying, because I thought, well, if I can't do this to reset anymore, I'm in deep shit. And sure enough, I was. I attempted suicide in 2021 because nothing was working. And there was something about that the suicide attempt somehow helped me. It flipped something in my brain. But nature is great until you can't feel it anymore. The numbness is one of the most horrible symptoms that people talk about, where you can't feel joy, you can't feel anything, which is why so many of us end up skydiving. Like I jumped at Operation Pegasus jump last year, 45
Really?
second free fall, like wee, and down I go. Well, I guess what I felt? Nothing. Fuck, I'm in trouble again. Right.
Yeah.
So I recognize that. I hit the ground. I'm like, yeah, that just didn't even blow. If I had hair, it didn't blow it back. It did nothing for me. And I've talked to other friends like, yeah, I jumped out of a plane and nothing, man. Oh, shit. The numbness. But that means you can't feel joy, which I can't. Other than occasional moments, I have moments of joy, which are awfully nice. But it's a terrible, terrible feeling. And things that do help that uh, are pretty important, because when you become numb, that is one of the precursors to suicide. Is when
Yeah.
that numbness is high on the list, when you just can't feel. That's why so many of us get so many tattoos, because while you're getting the tattoo, you're alive. I can feel something,
Yeah.
and so I do it so I can feel something,
That's yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I mean I know a lot of people that have tattoos. I have one, and it's the first time I've heard somebody say that, you know, it's feeling alive when you get a tattoo. Uh, so yeah, it's you know, so like I said, I don't have any mental health issues. Knock on wood. I ended up leaving the military on my own. On my own volition, and it was on my terms and everything, and had a great career. Lots of friends that I still keep in touch with. I know a lot of people that have killed themselves, due to service while they were in the military or post, and know people that have PTSD. And it's everybody's got a different story, and everybody's got a different pathway, I think, to get better, and everybody has a different set of issues that have caused whatever mental health issue that they have. Like
do you have
as
a
Nick
tour,
said,
Paul?
I do. Yeah, I deployed to Afghanistan in 2005, and then my twin brother did 2 deployments after me, in 2006, 2008, and he ended up leaving the military. And it's really interesting. Like everybody experiences things differently,
I'm going
and
to just interrupt you, Paul,
yeah,
because this is important. This is for the
sure,
audience, but it's for you too, brother. And I need
yeah,
you to hear this. Okay. You're fine. You have no mental health issues. I hope that's true,
yep,
but watch out, because when I was at the OSI clinic, there was guys like Vietnam vintage,
yeah,
Korea vintage. Sometimes it doesn't pop up until way, way later. It just sits and bubbles, and you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Then all of a sudden, one of your defense mechanisms, like gallows humor, right? Like just,
yep,
well, that's a defense mechanism. So there's things that I've heard people tell these stories, right, of people getting blown up and body parts all over the place and smiling and laughing about it because it was so funny. Ha 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 ha! Looked like a boneless chicken,
yeah,
because that's the defense mechanism is still in place. But what
hmm,
happens is that years and years later, when you've been out for long enough, that all of a sudden reality provides a contrast to war. Like it's tough when you come back from war because there's a contrast, but
yeah,
uh, you're still hanging on to it more than you realize. So sometimes it's because you have a kid, and all of a sudden a situation reminds you that you're having with your child, reminds you of something way back then, and then it hits you because the defense mechanism is suddenly not there anymore.
yep,
I just had a conversation yesterday. There's a tiny little group of us that were on my tour. I was in Croatia in '94, Roto 4, the summer tour. Okay.
yeah,
So that was 31 years ago. Just yesterday, my friends on this little private chat room that we have saying, yeah, I finally reached out for help last year.
wow,
Another one, I finally reached out for help the year before. Like It was five
Yeah.
for five,
Yeah.
5 for 5, finally reaching out, right? But they took longer than I did because they got out later than I did. One's still in,
Hmm.
actually. But I was out for 23 years before I
Wow.
went, oh shit, I think this is an issue. And then after diagnosis, it took me 2 years to accept the diagnosis that, yeah, this is definitely involving my service.
Yeah. No, it's some great advice. I mean, I have heard that you know, people have it when they leave the military, or then, like you said, it can happen anytime. It can happen for a host of factors. It can be brought on by a smell or a realization of
Yes.
something that happened before. So, no, it's great to talk about. I think one of the most interesting things that's happened is that, people talk about that there's still a stigma about it, but if everybody's talking about it and sharing it openly with people that they've just met, is it really a stigma?
Well,
Or
there
or
still is, because not everybody
right,
does that, right?
right, but the that's their own perception. But I think that the general consensus is that it's something that happens, and it could happen to anybody. I mean, when you get the
Hmm.
chief of defense staff, General Iyer was talking about Medak Pocket, and that one issue affected every decision that he made as a leader in the military
I had Wayne
for
on the
30
show.
years after, right? And so for him, and if we talk about making sure that people make uh, this a known thing, that everybody can be affected by something, I think it took a lot of courage for him to bring that up, because now it's something that is now national as much as everybody else is talking about it, so that we can have this open discussion, and that our researchers can continue to look at the different research, and clinicians can continue to try different modalities for each person to make this better, so that everybody can become, their better self through treatment.
and and making sure there's options, right? So we've
Yep.
we've talked a bit before, like the magic wand and the one treatment that I would move towards. And the reality is unfortunately not one treatment. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point in my lifetime of one treatment working for every single person, right? But somebody feeling like they have no options is a really challenging thing. Somebody feeling like there's another option to try something different, or this has shown some effectiveness, or this fits better with my lifestyle, right? This is something I want to try. This is something the healthcare system is set up to support logistically, in terms of the hours it takes to spend with you, who's the professional that needs to be with you when you're going through any of these treatments. So these multiple options and this continued investment to help those who need it is really important. So there's the reducing the stigma, but looking for multiple different options that is going, and hoping that, I'm hoping we get to the point where we can say that one option of a suite of them is going to help every person, as opposed to always just trying to only focus on the one that's the best, the 1% difference that not doesn't lead to the opportunity to help everyone. And we do, I parallel this to exercise, right? And I know that's not what we're talking about here, but it drives me insane when research and exercise only focuses on the 1% of, like, this high intensity interval training program is better than everything else. But for a lot of people, it doesn't work. When really just 99% of people, if they moved more, they would feel better physically. So I'm not paralyzed. I'm not drawing a parallel that, like, oh, if you move more, you'll feel better in mental health and everything.
But if
But
you're
the
suffering
idea
from
is
depression, that's severe. You can't even get out of bed. So that,
exactly. So I'm not drawing that parallel. The parallel
yeah,
I'm drawing is the idea that we can't only look for the thing that is marginally better to say this is the best treatment. We got to have a
Yep.
suite of options that people can know that if they take this step, that's something that might work for them. And then if
Yep.
well,
there's
that's what I
another
like
step
about the
there for
stellate
you.
ganglion block. I mean, it's coping, not healing, but coping that makes room for healing. And it's the type of
Hmm.
thing where I think most people would be okay. What, it's just a needle in my neck? Big deal.
Yeah.
And then that's going to for sure make me feel better for at least 3 months. Okay, so I show up for every 3 months and I get jabbed in the neck. Okay, like
Hmm.
that's an easy one for me. But you're
And
exactly right. Like you have to meet people where they're at. Not everybody is willing to try talk therapy for whatever reason. They don't need to prove why. They just won't do it. That's
hmm
fine. So
hmm
what's door
hmm
number 2 and 3 and 10? Like you have to meet people where they are at, and there's 6 or 7 thousand different veteran organizations in Canada that with all kinds of different healing modalities that some just try something, keep your feet moving.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
anything is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Almost. Meth is probably not better than nothing, but it
The point
might be a
also,
good time.
Mark, that yeah, I was going to say the point you mentioned too. Like we talk about still like gaining a block, and I believe the number you stated was 74% effectiveness, right?
If you do
And
single
I think
sympathetic, yeah,
so single. So let's use that number kind of thing, right?
yeah,
Still mean like high effectiveness. That's fantastic. Still
huge.
means that there's 26% not responding to
Yes.
that. Which
Yep.
if you're told somebody like this is the treatment, this is going to be it for you, and I'm not saying that you said that, but that idea, and then they fall into that 26%, that's got to be a pretty empty feeling on the outside of it. Is that I've tried the only thing
Yeah.
that works and it didn't work,
Well,
as
there's
opposed to give
one
this a try
veteran
and move on.
one veteran in particular that pops into my mind that I tried to reach out to have a conversation with, but just couldn't. I was trying to reach out to him because he said, and it was in an article somewhere, I forget where I came across it, but he goes, I can't wait for medical assistance in dying to be available for mental health because I got military PTSD, and the second it's available, because I've tried everything. One of these, I've tried everything people. It's like, no, you fucking haven't. I've tried everything, and the second it's available, I'm going to get mated. I'm going to have the government freaking kill me. Well, there are options. You haven't tried everything. For fuck's sakes, you have not. And but that is I am terrified about MAID being opened up for mental health, because there's going to be a ton of people that think they've tried everything. They don't know about my show or CIMVHR or any of it.
Yep.
And so, out of pure ignorance and a lack of uh, understanding, you can't have access to resources without knowing what those resources are. So, at the end of the day, they don't know the resources. There's no outreach programs to talk to these people and go, hey, whoa, whoa, time out. You haven't tried everything. What have you tried? Well, I went to the OSI clinic. That's not everything. You know, and do an intake interview with them and figure out where they're at so you can meet them there. It's like, well, just try one more thing. Just try one more thing. You know, a permanent solution to a temporary problem doesn't have to happen.
No.
Like there,
And I
there's
think
there's other treatments.
and I think that's why the government needs to do more funding for research. I mean, like you talked about with Trump scheduling ibogaine as a class one, he also put $50 million into research. So Health Canada has said that ibogaine is not fit for consumption for people due to lack of research. And there are tons of things that we know could be good or could not be good, but the only way you're going to know for sure is doing appropriate clinical trials research to be able to do that. And so having worked with CIMVHR now for 3 years, I think it's fantastic that there are so many organizations and academics that are looking at these topics, and mental health issues being one of them, and trying to figure out all of the different ways that it could be fixed. Maybe not temporarily or permanently, but if you're never going to try, you're never going to get better.
And I'd like the public, anybody listening to this, anytime you hear an authority saying there's not enough research, don't take it at face value. Maybe there isn't enough research. Maybe that's true, but it's not true just because they say it.
Right.
Often that phrase is said because it's just a bureaucrat that is resistant to change. Remember, Big Pharma still has a whole lot of swing on a whole lot of different organizations, including official government organizations that are super resistant to losing profits. So sometimes when that phrase is said, there's not enough research. No, there's not enough research that's just not true. Like with ibogaine, there is a lot of research done. There's all kinds of science, and at the end of the day, the most important are the lives that are saved. And I've had quite a few of them on the show. I've talked about ibogaine a lot on this show, and the before and after is absolutely unbelievable, and it has saved lives left, right, and center. And not just like physically, okay, I didn't die by suicide. We're talking about families that were rescued, like people taking the treatment, and then all of a sudden everything is better. They are closer to God. They can feel again. They can do the walk in nature and actually feel it and get something out of it.
Hmm.
Better relationships with their children, better relationships with their spouse, more stable, able to keep a job finally because they don't have wild emotional swings. Um, and I'm not saying it's the one and only, but it's a great place to start. Listen to the veterans. Listen to the people that have taken the treatments. That's how science. That's how medicine used to be done, by listening to your patients, and that's how you did the data collection, by listening to more people with the same story, and then that was the impetus to create a hypothesis to do the research. That was a good rant.
Yeah, and you said something earlier, Mark, that I think is important because there's still and not to say that there's no research that's been done. There's still more research to do, and one of the key parts of this too is understanding. You'd mentioned before that there's with any type of um, uh, any type of drug or things along those lines that there's risk involved, and part of it also is understanding the risk associated with that and understanding a better idea of who it could potentially harm, and that's cannabis as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like we talked about the psychosis aspect. That's something where you also have to make an informed decision and understand those where there is a potential risk there as well. And I agree with the idea that people need to be informed to be able to make their own decisions on risk versus kind of reward for them. But those pieces are important areas of research to understand as well, is being able to identify those at greater risk of use as well.
Boys, I think we're there. We've talked about issues. We've talked about potential solutions, and that's it. I'm going to add you guys as collaborators on this. So, and I tell this to when I remember to most of my guests, use this, bust it into clips, and use it as your FAQs. Embed it on your website under FAQs, like, "Hey, we were just on Operation Tango Romeo, finally." And stick it on your website and promote the heck out of it. Everybody that does that gets really really good results, and it increases your SEO on the website. So use it and abuse it, please. And for any future work, just remember what it is this cowboy does. Like we're at 360 episodes now, I think, give or take, over the last 7 years.
It's impressive.
Let me help. Let me help. And when there is a new thing that comes across your desk, let me know. Come back on.
Sure.
Let's talk about it. You know, what's the new cutting edge thing that we're going to talk about today? I'm here for the updates, and just let me help. I want to help,
This is
including
great.
building an advocacy arm so we can take the research and actually get it into implementation.
This is great. It's so part of what Nick was talking about earlier. You know how we get the message out. We've increased the number of podcasts and media interviews and webinars that CIMVHR's done over the last couple of years, and trying to get across the country in English and French, in person, on radio, on Teams, or whatever podcast medium are being used is kind of how we get the message out to researchers, to veterans, to everyday Canadians. So you know, your 360 episodes led us to getting here, which is fantastic. And I think how we're going to move forward with this is to continue to put some social media out in concert with you on this, to forward research that you know is going to be presented at CIMVHR Forum in October, back to you so you can share it with your audience, and we can share what you're doing with our audience, and that will get the message out, and that will help research move forward, and help knowledge be translated so that decision makers can work to help all the veterans, military members, and their families. So this is great.
And j'étudie français tous les jours avec Duolingo, mais je ne parle pas beaucoup. But I'm frickin' trying. So I'm still a few years away to be able to do an episode in French. But God damn it, I'm trying every damn day.
That's great.
Maybe I need some ibogaine to open up my brain so I can learn better, more gooder. I can learn more gooder. Thanks, boys. Any closing thoughts to leave the audience with?
No inspirational words more. I think you covered those well, Mark. And I just want to say thanks for having us on here. It's important that we keep getting our message out. It's unfortunate that a lot of people don't know about the great work that's going on in this country. And Paul said the same thing. He released from service and had no idea that there was this much research that's happening on military members, their families, veterans, public safety personnel. And that's the key thing, is that research should be informed by experiences, and research should then be translated to improve experiences, whether that's in service or within healthcare. And that's something we're aiming to do. So amplifying this message and making sure that those who served us, that we're serving them, because that's really what we're all here for. So thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, boys. Stay on the line. You're listening to Operation Tango Romeo, the Trauma Recovery Podcast for veterans, first responders, and their families. If you got any value out of this whatsoever today, help a guy out. Share like the sugar bear, because sharing is caring and helps promote the channel, which helps to save lives. Help us out.